Dr. Nathan Yates gripped the telegram so tightly that the paper crumpled beneath his fingers, his knuckles turning white as the devastating medical report confirmed what he had long suspected: he would never father children of his own. The year was 1876, and in the small town of Paradise, Wyoming, a doctor without heirs was like a ranch without cattle, pitied, questioned, incomplete. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows of his modest medical office, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. Nathan slipped the telegram into his vest pocket and gathered his medical bag. He needed to escape the confines of town, to return to the solitude of his ranch where no one would witness the grief etched across his face. Heading home early, Doc. Sheriff Thomas Miller called from across the street as Nathan locked the office door behind him. Nathan forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Got some ranch matters to attend to, Tom. Nothing serious. The lie came easily, though the weight of the truth pressed down on him like an anvil. At 34 years old, Nathan had built a respectable life for himself after the war. He'd established a medical practice, purchased a small ranch outside of town, and earned the respect of the townsfolk who depended on him. But the childhood illness that had nearly claimed his life had left invisible scars, ones that no amount of medical knowledge could heal. The ride to his ranch took 20 minutes, each hoofbeat of his mare, Penny, driving the reality deeper into his consciousness. No children, no legacy. No one to inherit the land he'd worked so hard to cultivate. His ranch came into view as he crested the final hill, a modest spread with a sturdy 2-story house, a barn, corral, and a few outbuildings. It wasn't the largest property in the territory, but it was his, built with his own hands and the proceeds from years of setting bones, delivering babies, and treating every ailment from consumption to bullet wounds. As Nathan unsaddled Penny and led her into the barn, his ranch hand, Elijah Washington, emerged from the shadows. "Everything all right, Doc?" Elijah asked, his weathered face creased with concern. The freed slave had become Nathan's right hand after the war, and little escaped his notice. "Just fine," Nathan replied, the lie bitter on his tongue. "How are the new calves?" "Growing strong," Elijah said, taking Penny's reins. "But you don't fool me, Doc. You got that look again like when we lost Mrs. Cartwright and her baby last winter." Nathan sighed. Elijah knew him too well. "Not a patient this time, just personal matters," Elijah nodded, understanding without pressing further. "I made stew. It's on the stove when you're ready." Nathan thanked him and headed toward the house, his footsteps heavy. Inside, he poured himself a whiskey and sank into his chair by the fireplace, not bothering to light a lamp as darkness settled around him. The emptiness of the house seemed to echo his future, quiet, orderly, and desperately alone. The spring of 1876 brought renewal to Paradise, but for Nathan, it merely marked another season of solitary existence. He threw himself into his work, riding out to distant homesteads, treating the miners in the camps north of town, and tending to his ranch in the hours between. If the townspeople noticed the shadows beneath his eyes or the tightness around his mouth, they attributed it to the demands of being the only doctor for 20 miles. On a warm May morning, Nathan was checking the fence line on the eastern edge of his property when he spotted a cloud of dust in the distance. Visitors were uncommon, especially on the seldom-used East Road. He shaded his eyes against the sun, watching as a wagon appeared, moving slowly but steadily toward his ranch. As the wagon drew closer, Nathan could make out a woman at the reins, her back straight despite what appeared to be a difficult journey. He rode to meet her, curiosity overriding caution in this territory where strangers were rare and often desperate. "Hello there," he called as he approached, keeping his hand visible to avoid alarming her. "Can I help you?" The woman pulled the wagon to a stop and looked up at him. Her face was partially shadowed by a plain bonnet, but Nathan could see that she was young, perhaps in her mid-20s, with a determined set to her jaw, despite the exhaustion evident in her posture. "I'm looking for Dr. Nathan Yates," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I was told his ranch is along this road." "You found him," Nathan replied, puzzled. "Though most folks come to my office in town if they need medical attention." She studied him for a moment, her gaze direct and unflinching. Then she reached behind her and lifted a bundle from the wagon seat. As she moved, Nathan realized it wasn't a bundle at all, but a sleeping toddler no more than 2 years old. "My name is Julia Davis," she said, cradling the child protectively. "I've come from Colorado Springs. Your name was given to me by Dr. William Palmer," he said. "He said you might be able to help us." Nathan felt a prickle of unease. William Palmer was an old colleague from medical school who occasionally corresponded with him about difficult cases. "Help with what, exactly?" Julia shifted the sleeping child, revealing a small face framed by dark curls. "This is my son, Samuel. He's been sick for months. The doctors in Colorado Springs couldn't help him. Dr. Palmer said you specialize in childhood ailments that most physicians can't treat." Nathan's reputation had indeed grown for his success with childhood diseases, born from his own experience and years of study. But something in Julia Davis's expression told him there was more to her journey than a simple medical consultation. "Mrs. Davis, Miss," she corrected gently. "I'm not married." Nathan nodded, noting the absence of a ring on her left hand. "Miss Davis, you've come a long way. Let's get you and your boy settled at the house, and then you can tell me more about his condition." Relief washed over her face, though the wariness in her eyes remained. "Thank you, Doctor. I wasn't sure you'd agree to see us." "I never turn away patients," Nathan said, "especially children." The irony of his specialty wasn't lost on him, a man who couldn't have children of his own, devoted to saving the children of others. He led the way to the ranch house, his mind racing. An unmarried woman with a child, traveling alone across dangerous territory to seek him out specifically, this was unusual even by frontier standards. And there was something about Julia Davis that unsettled him. A quiet dignity and desperate hope that stirred emotions he'd long suppressed. As they approached the house, Elijah emerged from the barn, eyebrows raised at the sight of the wagon. Nathan made quick introductions, and Elijah immediately took charge of the tired horse, promising to care for the animal and bring their visitors' belongings inside. "You must be exhausted," Nathan said as he helped Julia down from the wagon, careful not to disturb the sleeping child. "How long have you been traveling?" "5 days," she answered, following him to the house. "We would have arrived sooner, but Samuel was too ill to travel quickly. We had to stop often." Inside, Nathan led her to the small parlor where his housekeeper, Mrs. Flynn, had already begun fussing over the unexpected guests, stoking the fire and preparing tea despite the warm weather. "Mrs. Flynn, this is Miss Davis and her son, Samuel. They've come seeking medical help. Would you prepare the guest room, please?" The older woman nodded briskly. "Of course, Doctor. Poor lamb looks worn to the bone. I'll make up the bed with fresh linens and bring some broth for the little one when he wakes." Julia sank gratefully into an armchair, still holding Samuel close. The child stirred but didn't wake, his breathing shallow and rapid. Even from a distance, Nathan could see the unhealthy flush on the boy's cheeks. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the child. Julia hesitated only briefly before nodding. She gently transferred Samuel to Nathan's arms, and the doctor immediately noted the heat radiating from the small body. The child was indeed feverish, his skin dry and hot to the touch. Nathan conducted a preliminary examination there in the parlor, noting the swollen lymph nodes, the rasping quality of the boy's breathing, and the unusual rash on his arms. The symptoms were concerning but not immediately life-threatening. "How long has he been like this?" Nathan asked, returning the child to his mother's arms. "The fever comes and goes," Julia explained, brushing a curl from Samuel's forehead with tender concern. "It started 3 months ago. He was always a robust child before that, never sick a day in his life. But then the fevers began and the rash, and he stopped eating. He's lost so much weight." Her voice broke, and Nathan saw the fear she'd been holding at bay. "The doctor in Colorado Springs said it was just a childhood ailment that would pass, but it didn't. Then they said perhaps it was tuberculosis, but the treatments didn't help. Finally, Dr. Palmer examined him and suggested I bring him to you." "Did Dr. Palmer tell you why?" Nathan asked, his suspicion growing. Julia met his gaze directly. "He said you survived something similar as a child. He said if anyone would know how to treat it, you would." Nathan felt the blood drain from his face. The illness that had nearly killed him at age 10 and had rendered him sterile was rare and little understood. That Palmer would recognize it and send this woman to him was both a testament to his colleague's diagnostic skill and a burden Nathan wasn't sure he wanted to bear. "I need to examine him properly," Nathan said, rising from his chair. "Once he's rested and you've had something to eat, we'll talk more about his treatment." Julia nodded, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "Thank you, doctor. We've come so far and I was afraid." "No need for fear now," Nathan assured her, though he wasn't certain he could deliver on the hope he saw in her eyes. "You're here, and we'll do everything possible for your son." Mrs. Flynn returned to announce the guest room was ready, and Nathan watched as Julia carried her precious burden upstairs. The woman's determination was remarkable, traveling alone with a sick child across dangerous territory, seeking out a doctor she'd never met on the strength of another physician's recommendation. As Nathan retreated to his study to consult his medical texts, he couldn't shake the image of Julia Davis's face when she'd first looked up at him from her wagon, exhaustion etched in the shadows beneath her eyes. But hope, unmistakable hope, shining through despite everything she'd endured. That hope was a dangerous thing. Nathan knew better than most that medicine had its limitations, that not every child could be saved, no matter how desperately their mothers prayed or how far they traveled seeking miracles. And Julia Davis had already traveled very far indeed. The next morning, Nathan examined Samuel properly in the bright light of day. The boy was awake now, listless and whimpering, his large brown eyes following Nathan's movements with feverish wariness. Julia sat nearby, answering Nathan's questions with precision that suggested she'd been paying close attention to her son's symptoms. "The rash appeared first," she explained, "just small spots on his arms. Then the fever started and he began refusing food. The doctor in Colorado Springs said it was measles, but it never spread the way measles should." Nathan nodded, recognizing the pattern. "And his breathing. When did that become difficult?" "About 6 weeks ago," Julia said, her hands twisting in her lap. "That's when I really became frightened. He would wake gasping for air in the night." The symptoms matched Nathan's own childhood illness, a rare condition that had been documented in only a handful of medical journals. He'd spent years researching it after his recovery, corresponding with physicians in Europe who had encountered similar cases. "Miss Davis," Nathan said carefully, "I believe Samuel has a condition called Furlick syndrome. It's uncommon, especially in children so young, but the symptoms are distinctive." Julia leaned forward, hope and fear warring in her expression. "Can you treat it?" Nathan hesitated. The truth was complex. "I can try. The treatment is experimental, based partly on my own experience and partly on research from European doctors. I can't promise it will work, but I believe it offers Samuel his best chance." "That's all I ask," Julia said quietly. "His best chance." Nathan outlined the treatment, a regimen of herbal infusions, careful dietary changes, and specific therapies to strengthen the boy's lungs and immune system. It would take time, he warned, and Samuel would likely get worse before he improved. "You're welcome to stay here during his treatment," Nathan offered. The journey back to Colorado would be too taxing for him in this condition. Relief flooded Julia's face. "I had hoped. That is, I've given up our home in Colorado Springs. I used the last of my savings to make this journey." Nathan was startled by this revelation. "You left everything behind without knowing if I could help." Julia met his gaze steadily. "I had nothing left to lose. Dr. Samuel is all I have in this world. Where he goes, I go." The quiet determination in her voice stirred something in Nathan admiration, certainly, but also a protectiveness he hadn't expected to feel. This woman had gambled everything on the slim hope that he could save her child. The weight of that trust settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. "Then we'll make a place for you here," he said, "for as long as it takes." That evening, as Nathan mixed the first of the medicinal teas for Samuel, Elijah appeared in the doorway of his study, a knowing look on his weathered face. "She's something, that one," the older man remarked. "Crossed half the territory with a sick child all on her own." "She had no choice," Nathan replied, measuring herbs with precise care. "Her son needs help that no one else could provide." Elijah leaned against the doorframe. "And what about you, Doc? What do you need?" Nathan glanced up, startled by the question. "I don't understand." "Don't you?" Elijah's eyes held a wisdom born of hard years. "I've watched you these past months, ever since that telegram came. You've been a ghost in your own house. Now there's light in your eyes again." "I'm simply focused on a challenging case," Nathan protested, uncomfortable with Elijah's perception. "If you say so." Elijah straightened. "But that woman and her boy, they've brought something to this house that it's been missing for a long time." Before Nathan could respond, Elijah had disappeared down the hallway, leaving him with the troubling thought that perhaps his ranch hand saw more clearly than he did himself. The days that followed established a new routine at the Yates ranch. Nathan adjusted his medical practice in town, seeing patients in the mornings and returning to the ranch by midday to monitor Samuel's condition. Mrs. Flynn took Julia under her wing, showing her around the kitchen and garden, while Elijah entertained the boy during his increasingly frequent periods of alertness. To Nathan's relief, Samuel responded to the treatment more quickly than he had dared hope. Within a week, the fever had subsided and the boy's appetite had begun to return. The rash was fading, and though his breathing remained labored, the frightening gasping episodes had decreased. Julia proved to be not only a devoted mother, but also an intelligent and observant partner in Samuel's care. She followed Nathan's instructions meticulously, noting every change in her son's condition with a nurse's precision. "You would have made an excellent physician," Nathan remarked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Samuel play with blocks on a quilt spread before them. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the scene, making the moment feel strangely intimate. Julia smiled, tucking a strand of light brown hair behind her ear. "In another life, perhaps. My father was a pharmacist before the war. He taught me about herbs and remedies from the time I was Samuel's age." "And your mother?" Nathan asked, realizing how little he knew about this woman who had suddenly become a fixture in his home. A shadow crossed Julia's face. She died when I was 16. Influenza. My father followed 3 years later wounds from Gettysburg that never properly healed. I'm sorry, Nathan said softly. The war took much from all of us. Julia nodded, her gaze distant. It left many scars, visible and invisible. She looked at him with sudden directness. You were a doctor during the war, weren't you? How did you know? Your hands, she said simply. They have the steadiness that comes from working under unimaginable pressure. And sometimes, when Samuel cries out in pain, your eyes get a faraway look like you're seeing other patients, other wounds. Nathan was startled by her perception. Few people notice the ghosts he carried from those battlefield hospitals. Yes, he admitted. I served with the Union Army Medical Corps, 3 years of hell that taught me more about medicine than a decade in medical school could have. It's why you became a doctor in a frontier town, isn't it? Julia asked. Away from the crowds and the memories. Nathan nodded, surprised by how easily she had read him. Paradise needed a doctor, I needed peace. It seemed a fair exchange. And the ranch. My father was a farmer in Pennsylvania, Nathan explained. I grew up with soil under my fingernails. After the war, I wanted something solid to build on. Land doesn't lie to you or change its mind. It simply responds to how you treat it. Julia smiled at that. Like medicine. Very much like medicine, Nathan agreed, watching Samuel as the boy carefully stacked blocks, his small face focused with childish determination. Your son is remarkably resilient. Like his mother, Julia said without pride, simply stating a fact. We've had to be. Nathan hesitated before asking the question that had lingered since her arrival. Samuel's father, is he dead? Julia finished for him. No, not dead, just gone. He was a lieutenant stationed in Colorado Springs. When I told him I was with child, he was already engaged to a banker's daughter back east. He offered money, which I refused. I haven't seen him since. The matter-of-fact way she related this abandonment struck Nathan deeply. No bitterness, no self-pity, just the straightforward recounting of one more obstacle she had overcome. Samuel doesn't lack for anything essential, Julia continued, watching her son with quiet pride. I've made sure of that. I can see that you have, Nathan said, and found that he meant it. Despite their circumstances, Julia had clearly provided her son with stability and love, the foundations any child needed to thrive. As June turned to July, Samuel's improvement continued steadily. The boy who had arrived at the ranch too weak to stand was now running after the chickens in the yard, his laughter a new and welcome sound on the property. Nathan found himself looking forward to returning from town each day, eager to see what progress his young patient had made and, increasingly, to spend time in Julia's company. Their conversations ranged widely from medicine to literature, from ranching techniques to philosophy. Julia was well-read despite her limited formal education, with a quick mind and thoughtful opinions that challenged Nathan's own thinking. You disagree with my assessment of Dickens? He asked one evening as they sat shelling peas on the porch, Samuel already asleep upstairs. I think your admiration for his social commentary blinds you to his sentimentality, Julia replied, her fingers never pausing in their work. Great suffering in his novels is always redeemed by implausible goodness. Real life rarely provides such neat resolutions. Perhaps that's why we read novels, Nathan suggested, to believe in the possibility of those resolutions. Julia considered this, her head tilted thoughtfully. Maybe, but I prefer stories that acknowledge how complex healing really is, that some wounds never fully close. Nathan studied her profile in the fading light, wondering which wound she carried that had never fully closed. There was a depth to Julia Davis that continued to surprise him, layers of strength and vulnerability that revealed themselves gradually, like petals unfurling. The town of Paradise took notice of the changes at the Yates ranch. Rumors spread about the young woman and child staying with the doctor. Some speculated that Julia was a distant relative, others that she was a nurse Nathan had hired to help with his practice. Nathan let the gossip flow around him, neither confirming nor denying any particular version of events. Sheriff Miller broached the subject directly one afternoon as Nathan was leaving the general store. "That Davis woman seems to be settling in at your place," he observed casually. "Folks are talking." "Folks always talk, Tom," Nathan replied evenly. "Miss Davis is here while I treat her son, nothing more to it than that." The sheriff gave him a skeptical look. "If you say so, Doc. Just remember this is a small town with big opinions. Mrs. Whitcomb at the Church Society is already organizing a welcoming committee." Nathan groaned inwardly. The last thing Julia needed was the scrutiny of Paradise's most determined matchmakers. "Tell Mrs. Whitcomb that Miss Davis is here temporarily and prefers privacy while her son recovers." "I'll try," Tom said doubtfully, "but you know how determined those ladies can be when they get an idea in their heads." The sheriff's warning proved prophetic. 3 days later, a delegation of women from town arrived at the ranch, bearing casseroles, fresh bread, and thinly veiled curiosity. Mrs. Whitcomb, a formidable widow who had appointed herself the moral guardian of Paradise, led the group. "We simply couldn't let this poor dear manage alone any longer," she announced to Nathan as the women swept into his home without waiting for an invitation. "A single mother with a sick child needs community support." Before Nathan could object, the women had descended upon the kitchen, where Julia was teaching Samuel to roll out dough for biscuits. To his surprise, Julia handled the invasion with grace, thanking the women for their kindness while skillfully deflecting their more intrusive questions. "No, I don't have family in Wyoming," she replied to one inquiry. "Dr. Yates was recommended to me specifically for my son's condition." "And how fortunate that the doctor had room to accommodate you," Mrs. Whitcomb remarked with pointed emphasis. "So generous of him to open his home to strangers." "Dr. Yates has been extraordinarily kind," Julia agreed smoothly. "Samuel's health is improving daily under his care." The boy in question chose that moment to abandon his dough and wrap his arms around Nathan's legs, looking up at him with a beaming smile that displayed his few baby teeth. "Doc," he exclaimed happily. The simple childish affection silenced the room momentarily. Nathan felt a surge of unexpected emotion as he lifted Samuel into his arms, the small body warm and trusting against his chest. He had delivered dozens of children in Paradise, treated countless childhood ailments, but this was different. This child had somehow worked his way into Nathan's heart in a way that left him vulnerable and confused. Mrs. Whitcomb's sharp eyes missed nothing. "Well," she said with a speculative glance between Nathan and Julia, "it seems young Samuel has taken quite a shine to you, Doctor." "Children often bond with their physicians," Nathan said briskly, setting Samuel down despite the boy's protests. "It's a natural response to care and attention." But even as he spoke the professional explanation, Nathan knew it wasn't the complete truth. His attachment to Samuel and increasingly to Julia went beyond the bounds of a doctor-patient relationship. The realization was unsettling. After the women departed, laden with the gossip they had come to gather, Nathan found Julia in the garden, her back to the house as she violently pulled weeds from between the rows of vegetables. "I apologize for that invasion," he said, approaching cautiously. "Small-town curiosity can be overwhelming." Julia straightened, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. "You have nothing to apologize for. I understand their interest." A mysterious woman and child appearing at the bachelor doctor's ranch its natural fodder for speculation. Nevertheless, you shouldn't have to endure their scrutiny. Your reasons for being here are private. Julia turned to face him fully, her expression earnest. "Dr. Yates, Nathan, I want you to know that I'm grateful beyond words for everything you've done for Samuel, for both of us. But I also understand that our presence here complicates your life. If you think we should move into town—" "No," Nathan interrupted, the force of his response surprising them both. "That is, Samuel still needs consistent monitoring, and you're both. That is, the ranch is the best place for his recovery." Julia studied his face, searching for something in his expression. Whatever she saw there softened her own features. "If you're certain—" "I am," Nathan said firmly. "This is your home for as long as you need it to be." The word home hung between them, charged with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. For the first time since Julia's arrival, an awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. That night, Nathan sat alone in his study long after the house had gone quiet, confronting truths he had been avoiding for weeks. The ranch that had once seemed so empty now felt alive with purpose. The halls that had echoed with his solitary footsteps now rang with a child's laughter. And the future that had stretched before him, barren and predetermined, now seemed to offer new possibilities he had never dared to consider. But the fundamental facts remained unchanged. Nathan Yates could not father children. He carried the burden of that knowledge like a stone in his chest. Whatever his growing feelings for Julia and Samuel, he could never offer them a complete family. The best he could provide was medical care for the boy and temporary shelter for them both. Even as he tried to convince himself of these limitations, another part of his mind whispered treacherous hopes. What if Samuel needed long-term medical supervision? What if Julia chose to stay in paradise? What if there were ways to build a family that didn't depend on his ability to sire children? Nathan pushed these thoughts away, focusing instead on Samuel's treatment plan. The boy was improving steadily, but the underlying condition would require monitoring for years to come. Nathan had already begun corresponding with specialists in Denver and San Francisco about the case, seeking confirmation of his diagnosis and treatment approach. A soft knock at the study door interrupted his thoughts. Julia stood in the doorway, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the night chill. "I saw the light," she said softly. "I couldn't sleep." Nathan rose to his feet. "Is Samuel—" "He's fine," Julia assured him. "Sleeping peacefully. I've been thinking about what happens next." Nathan gestured to a chair, and Julia settled into it, tucking her feet beneath her in a gesture that spoke of growing comfort in his home. "Samuel is getting better," she continued. "I can see it every day. Soon, he'll be well enough that we won't need to impose on your hospitality any longer." "You're not imposing," Nathan said quickly. "As I said earlier—" "I know what you said," Julia interrupted gently. "And I'm grateful. But we can't stay forever, Nathan. You have your life, your practice. And Samuel and I need to build something of our own." The thought of them leaving created a hollow feeling in Nathan's chest. "What are your plans?" Julia sighed, her gaze distant. "I had thought to find work in a larger town, Denver perhaps. I have some skills as a seamstress and I've done bookkeeping before." "And Samuel?" "His condition will require ongoing care." "I know," Julia acknowledged, worry creasing her brow. "That's what keeps me awake at night. In Colorado Springs, I could barely afford ordinary medical care for him, the specialized treatment he needs." She trailed off, and Nathan saw the fear she usually kept hidden, the terror of a mother who might not be able to provide what her child desperately needed, Without thinking, he reached across the space between them and took her hand. "Julia, Paradise needs a seamstress. Mrs. Chen is getting older, and her eyesight isn't what it once was, and the mercantile has been looking for someone with bookkeeping experience since Mr. Peterson's arthritis worsened." Hope flickered in Julia's eyes. "Are you suggesting we stay in Paradise?" "I'm suggesting it's an option worth considering," Nathan said carefully. "Samuel could continue his treatments. You could establish yourselves in the community, and I could keep an eye on his progress." Julia's fingers tightened around his. "That's very generous, but I don't want charity." "It's not charity," Nathan insisted. "It's practical for everyone involved. Paradise gets skilled labor it needs. Samuel gets medical care. And I get the satisfaction of seeing my most interesting case through to full recovery." A small smile played at the corners of Julia's mouth. "Is that all Samuel is to you? An interesting case?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning that extended far beyond the simple words. Nathan knew the honest answer would change everything between them, crossing a boundary he had carefully maintained. "No," he said finally, his voice low. "Samuel is much more than a case to me now, and so are you." Julia's breath caught, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then, with deliberate care, she withdrew her hand from his and stood. "We should both get some rest," she said, though her voice held a new warmth. "Tomorrow will bring decisions enough." As she left the study, Nathan remained seated, wondering if he had said too much or not enough. The comfortable routine they had established over the past weeks had shifted tonight, revealing the deeper currents that ran beneath their daily interactions. The following day brought unexpected complications. A mining accident north of town required Nathan's urgent attention, and he was called away before dawn. By the time he returned to the ranch that evening, exhausted and blood-spattered, he found Julia waiting anxiously on the porch. "Samuel's fever has returned," she said without preamble, her face tight with worry. "It started this afternoon higher than before." Nathan's fatigue vanished instantly. He followed Julia upstairs to find Samuel restless in his small bed, his cheeks flushed crimson, his breathing labored. The improvements of recent weeks seemed to have vanished overnight. Working quickly, Nathan examined the boy, noting with growing concern the return of symptoms he had thought conquered. The rash had reappeared, angrier than before, and the lymph nodes in the child's neck were swollen and tender. "How long has he been like this?" Nathan asked, reaching for his medical bag. "The fever started around noon," Julia replied, her voice steady despite her evident fear. "The rash appeared about 2 hours later. His breathing became difficult just before sunset." Nathan prepared a stronger version of the herbal infusion that had helped before, adding additional components based on his research. As he worked, he explained his thinking to Julia, who listened with focused attention. "The disease often progresses in waves," he told her. "Improvement followed by relapse is not uncommon, but each relapse should be less severe than the one before if the treatment is working." "And if it isn't?" Julia asked, the question direct and unflinching. Nathan met her gaze honestly. "Then we adjust the treatment. We try something else." "We don't give up, Julia." She nodded, drawing strength from his determination. Together, they coaxed Samuel into drinking the bitter medicine, bathed his overheated body with cool cloths, and monitored his breathing through the night. By dawn, the fever had broken, and the boy slept peacefully. The crisis passed as quickly as it had come. As the first light of morning filtered through the curtains, Nathan found Julia asleep in the chair beside Samuel's bed, her hand resting protectively on her son's arm. The sight stirred something profound in him: admiration for her courage, respect for her unwavering dedication, and something deeper, something he was increasingly unable to deny. When Julia opened her eyes to find Nathan watching her, a moment of wordless communication passed between them, shared relief, shared purpose, and shared feelings neither was ready to name. "He's better," she whispered, looking down at Samuel's peaceful face. "Yes," Nathan agreed. "But this episode confirms what I suspected: his recovery will be a long road with occasional setbacks." Julia straightened in her chair, wincing as she stretched muscles stiffened from the night's vigil. "Then we'll face them as they come." Nathan repeated softly. "You've decided to stay in paradise." Julia met his gaze steadily. "If there's truly work for me here, yes, it seems the wisest course for Samuel's health." "I'm glad," Nathan said simply, and was rewarded with a smile that lit her tired face. In the weeks that followed, Julia and Samuel became increasingly integrated into the life of paradise. With Nathan's recommendation, Julia secured work at both the mercantile and the dressmaker's shop, splitting her time between bookkeeping and seamstress duties. Her skill and reliability quickly earned the respect of her employers, and her quiet dignity won over even the most suspicious townspeople. Samuel continued to improve under Nathan's care, with only occasional minor relapses that were quickly addressed. By August, he was a familiar sight in town, holding his mother's hand as they walked to the mercantile, or sitting contentedly on the porch of the doctor's office while Julia worked nearby. The boy's attachment to Nathan deepened as his health improved. He followed the doctor around the ranch, helping with chores, asking endless questions, and demanding stories at bedtime. Nathan found himself looking forward to these moments with an anticipation that both delighted and terrified him. "He worships you," Julia remarked one evening as they watched Samuel carefully feeding the chickens under Elijah's watchful eye. "Children form attachments easily," Nathan said, repeating his earlier explanation. Though he knew it was inadequate, Julia gave him a knowing look. "It's more than that. You've become important to him, to us both." The admission hung in the air between them, and opening Nathan wasn't sure he was brave enough to walk through. Before he could respond, Samuel came running toward them, his small face alight with excitement. Doc. Elijah says the mayor's having her baby tonight. Can I watch, please?" Nathan laughed, ruffling the boy's dark curls. "That's up to your mother, and it might be very late past your bedtime." "Please, Mama," Samuel begged, turning his pleading gaze to Julia. "I'll be good, I promise." Julia hesitated, looking to Nathan. "Is it appropriate for him to see?" "Birth is a natural process," Nathan replied. "There's nothing improper about witnessing it, and it might be educational." "Then yes," Julia decided, "but only if you promise to come to bed when Dr. Yates says it's time. No arguments." Samuel's whoop of joy carried across the yard, startling the chickens. As he raced back to tell Elijah the good news, Julia turned to Nathan with amusement. "You've created a monster," she teased. "Now he'll want to be a doctor like you." The innocent comment struck Nathan with unexpected force. A child following in his footsteps, it was a future he had resigned himself to never experiencing. The thought that Samuel might someday see him as a father figure was both wonderful and painful. Julia, observant as always, noticed the change in his expression. "Did I say something wrong?" Nathan shook his head. "No, it's just, I was thinking about futures and choices and—" He trailed off, unsure how to explain the complicated emotions her comment had stirred. Julia studied him thoughtfully. "Nathan, there's something you haven't told me, isn't there? Something about yourself." The perceptiveness of the question startled him. "What makes you say that?" "I've watched you with Samuel," she said softly. "You care for him with such tenderness, such natural affection. Yet sometimes when you look at him, there's a sadness in your eyes that breaks my heart." Nathan turned away, gazing out over the ranch that had once seemed enough to fill his life. "It's complicated." "Most important things are," Julia replied simply, waiting for him to continue. The impulse to confide in her was overwhelming. In the month since her arrival, Julia had become not just a guest in his home but a confidante, someone whose insight he valued and whose judgment he trusted. "The illness Samuel has," he began slowly. "The one I had as a child, it left me with more than memories. There were consequences." Julia's expression remained open, encouraging him to continue. "I can't have children, Julia," he said finally, the words emerging with difficulty. "The fever damaged me in ways that can't be repaired. That's what the telegram confirmed the day before you arrived. I had consulted specialists in Boston, hoping." He shook his head, but the verdict was unanimous. Understanding dawned in Julia's eyes. "That's why you recognized Samuel's condition so quickly. Why you've been so determined to save him from the same fate." "Yes," Nathan admitted. "Though in his case we caught it earlier, the damage should be minimal with proper care." Julia moved closer, her presence a comfort even before she spoke. "I'm sorry, Nathan, truly. I know how much that knowledge must hurt you." "I had accepted it," he said quietly, "or thought I had. I built this life, the practice, the ranch, knowing it would end with me. And then you arrived with Samuel, and suddenly—" "Suddenly what?" Julia prompted when he fell silent. Nathan met her gaze directly. "Suddenly I found myself wanting things I had no right to want. A family. A future that included more than just my work in this land." The confession hung between them, changing the air, changing everything. Julia's eyes softened, but she didn't look away. "Why would you have no right to want those things?" she asked gently. "Because I can't offer a complete life to any woman," Nathan replied, the bitterness he usually kept contained seeping into his voice. "What wife would choose a husband who can't give her children?" "One who already has a child, perhaps," Julia said quietly. "One who values a man's character over his ability to procreate." The simple statement struck Nathan speechless. Before he could gather his thoughts to respond, Samuel's excited shout announced that the mare was indeed in labor, and the moment for private conversation was gone. That night, as they stood together in the warm darkness of the barn, watching new life enter the world, Nathan felt Julia's hand slip into his. The gesture was small but deliberate, a choice made with full awareness of what he had revealed. The birth went smoothly, the foal emerging into Elijah's waiting hands while Samuel watched with wide-eyed wonder from a safe distance. As the newborn struggled to its feet on wobbly legs, the boy's face reflected the miracle they had witnessed. "Life finds a way," Julia murmured, echoing Nathan's own thoughts. "Not always the way we expect, but it finds a way nonetheless." In the days that followed, something shifted between them. The careful distance they had maintained gave way to a new openness, hands that lingered when they touched, conversations that stretched late into the night, shared glances that held meaning beyond words. Paradise noticed the change. The town buzzed with speculation about the doctor and the seamstress, gossip that ranged from benevolent to scandalous. Nathan found himself the recipient of knowing looks from male patients and pointed questions from their wives. "Miss Davis seems to be settling in well, Mrs. Peterson remarked as Nathan examined her husband's arthritic hands. "Such a lovely young woman, and that boy of hers is a treasure. It would be a shame to see them leave Paradise now that they've become part of our community." "I agree," Nathan said neutrally, though his heart raced at even the suggestion of Julia and Samuel departing. "A child needs a father," Mrs. Peterson continued, abandoning subtlety entirely. "Especially a boy, and a doctor would make an excellent provider, don't you think, Harold?" Mr. Peterson grunted in embarrassed agreement, while Nathan pretended absorption in his examination. Similar conversations occurred throughout town as summer faded into early autumn. Nathan weathered them with outward composure, though each one forced him to confront the question he had been avoiding. What future could he and Julia realistically build together? The answer came unexpectedly, on a crisp September evening. Nathan had been called to a difficult birth at a homestead 10 miles from town. When he finally returned to the ranch, exhausted but satisfied after delivering a healthy baby girl, he found Julia waiting for him in his study. "Successful?" she asked as he sank into his chair, rubbing his eyes. "Mother and daughter both doing well," Nathan confirmed. "First child after 10 years of marriage, they'd nearly given up hope." Julia smiled. "You've given them a precious gift." "Nature gave it," Nathan corrected. "I just helped it along." "Don't diminish your role," Julia admonished gently. "You bring life and healing to this community every day." "It matters, Nathan, you matter." The simple affirmation, offered without expectation, broke something open in him. "Julia," he began, then faltered, searching for the right words. She waited, patient as always, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the lamp between them. "These past months," he tried again. "Having you and Samuel here, it's changed everything for me. I know you came seeking medical help, not complications. And I have no right to ask for more than you've already given, but I find myself hoping." "Hoping what?" Julia prompted, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "Hoping that you might consider staying, not just in paradise, but here, with me. As my wife." The words hung in the air between them, irrevocable. Julia's eyes widened, and for a terrible moment Nathan feared he had misread everything. "Before you answer," he hurried on, "you should know exactly what that would mean. I can't give you more children, Julia. Samuel would be our only child. If that's not enough for you, I'll understand. You deserve—" "Stop," Julia interrupted, rising from her chair to move closer to him. "Nathan, stop telling me what I deserve and listen to what I want." She knelt beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. "From the moment we arrived at your ranch, you've treated Samuel and me with respect and kindness. You saved my son's life. You've given us a home when we had none, and somewhere along the way you've become essential to us both." Hope surged in Nathan's chest, but he forced himself to be completely honest. "I need you to be certain, Julia. A marriage without children, a marriage is what two people make of it," Julia said firmly. "My son already loves you as a father. She paused, color rising in her cheeks. "I already love you as a woman loves a man she wants to build a life with. If you're asking me to be your wife, Nathan Yates, my answer is yes." The simplicity of her acceptance, the clarity of her choice, humbled him. Nathan drew her into his arms, overwhelmed by the gift she was offering: a family, a future, a love he had never expected to find. Their wedding took place in October, a small ceremony in the town church with Samuel proudly serving as ring bearer. The people of Paradise turned out in full force, the community embracing the union of their doctor and the seamstress, who had won their respect through quiet dignity and hard work. As Nathan spoke his vows, looking into Julia's eyes with their son standing between them, he marveled at how completely his life had transformed in the span of a few months. The ranch that had once echoed with his solitary footsteps now resonated with family voices. The future that had seemed predetermined now stretched before him, rich with possibilities he had never dared to imagine. That night, after Samuel was tucked into bed in his room across the hall, Nathan held his wife close in the darkness, overwhelmed by gratitude. "You've given me more than I ever thought possible," he whispered against her hair. Julia lifted her face to his, her expression serene in the moonlight filtering through the curtains. "We've given each other what we needed most," she corrected gently. "A family, a home, a chance to heal old wounds and build something new together." "And Samuel?" Nathan asked, thinking of the boy who had captured his heart so completely. Julia smiled. "Samuel has exactly what I hoped to find when I set out from Colorado Springs: a future, a father, and the care he needs to grow strong." Nathan kissed her then, sealing their new beginning with tenderness and promise. In the quiet of their bedroom, with their son sleeping peacefully nearby, he finally understood that family was not defined by blood or biology, but by love freely given and gratefully received. 5 years later, on a bright spring morning, Nathan stood on the porch of the expanded ranch house, watching as Samuel, now a sturdy 8-year-old, helped Elijah with the new foals. The boy's health had continued to improve under Nathan's care, with no major relapses in the past 3 years. Though he would always need certain precautions, Samuel had grown into an active, curious child with his mother's determination and a compassion that made Nathan proud. The sound of a wagon approaching drew Nathan's attention. He shaded his eyes against the sun, recognizing Sheriff Miller's distinctive driving style. "Morning, Doc," Tom called as he pulled the wagon to a stop. "Got some visitors for you." In the back of the wagon sat a woman with 2 small children, a girl of about 4 and an infant in her arms. The woman's face was drawn with worry, her clothes dusty from travel. "This is Mrs. Henderson," Tom explained as he helped the woman down. "Just arrived on the stage from Laramie. Her husband's setting up their homestead north of town, and the little one's taken sick on the journey." Nathan stepped forward, medical instincts immediately engaged. "Bring them inside, Tom. Let's have a look." As he ushered the worried mother and her children into the house, Julia appeared from the garden, wiping her hands on her apron. She took in the situation at a glance and immediately moved to make the newcomers comfortable. "Nathan will take good care of your baby," she assured Mrs. Henderson, taking the older child by the hand. "Emma and I will make some tea while the doctor examines your little one." The grateful look the young mother gave Julia spoke volumes about the reputation the Yates family had established in Paradise, not just as medical providers, but as a source of comfort and stability in times of crisis. Later that evening, after the Henderson family had been sent to town with medicine and instructions, Nathan found Julia in their bedroom, brushing her hair before the mirror. The simple domestic scene filled him with contentment. "The baby will be fine," he said, coming to stand behind her. "Just a travel-induced fever, nothing serious." Julia nodded, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "Mrs. Henderson reminds me of myself when I first arrived, desperate, exhausted, willing to try anything to save her child." "You were more composed," Nathan recalled with a smile. "Terrified, yes, but determined in a way that impressed me from the start." "I had to be," Julia said simply. "Samuel was counting on me, just as Mrs. Henderson's children are counting on her." Nathan placed his hands on her shoulders, his thumbs making gentle circles against the tension he found there. "You know, we've helped a dozen families like the Hendersons settle in Paradise over the past few years. Word has spread about the doctor who specializes in childhood ailments. And his wife, who understands what it means to fight for a child's future," Julia added, leaning back against him. "We make a good team, Nathan." "The best," he agreed, bending to kiss the top of her head. "I never imagined, when you drove that wagon up to my ranch 5 years ago, how completely you would change my life." Julia turned on her stool to face him, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever regret it, taking us in, marrying me, becoming a father to another man's child?" The question surprised him after all this time. Regret? How could I regret the greatest blessing of my life? She searched his face, finding only truth there. Even though we couldn't have children of our own. Julia, Nathan said gently, drawing her to her feet and into his arms. We have created something far more valuable than I ever dreamed possible. Not just a family for ourselves, but a place of healing for others. The children who come to us in need there all hours in a way, if only for a little while. Julia's eyes softened with understanding. Like Emma Henderson today, holding onto my hand while you examined her baby brother. Or the Jenkins twins last winter, staying with us while their mother recovered from pneumonia. Exactly, Nathan nodded. The illness that prevented me from fathering children led me to medicine, to this community, to you and Samuel. And through you, I've found a different kind of fatherhood than I ever expected. As if summoned by their conversation, a soft knock sounded at the bedroom door. Samuel stood in the hallway in his nightshirt, a book clutched in his hands. Papa, he said, the name he had adopted for Nathan 2 years earlier still filling the doctor's heart with joy. You promised to read the next chapter about the Amazon explorers tonight. So I did, Nathan agreed, reaching out to ruffle the boy's dark curls so like his mother's. Go get settled and I'll be there in a moment. As Samuel scampered back to his room, Julia leaned up to kiss Nathan softly. Go, your son is waiting. I'll be here when you're finished. Nathan held her gaze for a moment longer, marveling at the journey that had brought them together, a desperate mother, a wounded doctor, and the child who had bridged their separate sorrows into a shared joy. I love you, he said simply, the words carrying the weight of everything they had built together. And I love you, Julia replied, her smile holding the promise of all the years still to come. As Nathan headed down the hallway to Samuel's room, he reflected on how the telegram that had once seemed like a death sentence, unable to father children, had instead become the beginning of a different kind of legacy. Not one of blood and inheritance, but of healing, compassion, and family bonds forged through choice rather than obligation. In Samuel's eager face, in the home he shared with Julia, in the community they served together, Nathan Yates had found answers to questions he hadn't known to ask, and healing for wounds he had thought would never close. The doctor who couldn't have children had found fatherhood after all, when hope walked into his ranch in the form of a determined woman and her precious son. And in the process, he had discovered that family, like medicine, like love, was not defined by limitation, but by possibility.